listener production.
Hey, it's Spyrou with you and welcome to The Briefing. We've got less than a fortnight to go until we find out who will be the next Prime Minister of this country. And where it used to be a battle of the red, blues and green, for this election there's another shade in town, one that's growing in popularity and looking to shake up politics with its Teal-tinged independent views.
The major parties just throw the ball between them and tinker around the edges on these structural issues, but never get anything really substantive done. The biggest risk is continuing to elect the same people to fix the problems that they created. More of the same will lead to more of the same.
That chat with Teal MP Zoe Daniel coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Tuesday, the 22nd of April.
Good morning, Chris, and good morning to you listening at home, or perhaps you're on your ride or drive to work. Some sad news as this Easter long weekend draws to a close. All Australian government flags will fly at half-mast today in honour of the late head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, who's passed away yesterday, aged 88. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and opposition leader Peter Dutton have joined the world's leaders, including King Charles, Donald Trump and others from Europe, in paying tribute to the pontiff.
Pope Francis lived out his faith and vocation in word and deed. He was truly inspirational. In his modest way of life and at his weekly audiences, he demonstrated his commitment to peace, equality and inclusion. Pope Francis's love for humanity was powerful and profound. The memory and example of his compassion will long endure.
The PM speaking there. Pope Francis died only hours after making a brief surprise appearance on Sunday, blessing thousands of people who had gathered in the Vatican's St. Peter's Square for Easter. His death certificate, which was published by the Vatican this morning, shows he died from a stroke that then led to a coma and irreversible heart failure, with his passing coming a little under a month after being discharged from hospital, where he'd spent 38 days being treated and recovering from double pneumonia, bronchitis and minor kidney failure, Chris.
Yeah, the Argentina-born Pope who led the world's 1.3 billion Roman Catholics since 2013 was the first Pope to be born or raised outside of Europe in more than 1,200 years. So it is a papacy of firsts. Speaking of his papacy, he had advocated for an end to the fighting in Gaza, Russia and Ukraine. And he did take a more progressive approach when it came to things like the environment, refugees and homosexuality compared to his predecessors. So that's something that he will be remembered for, this week and as time moves on. The Catholic Archbishop of Sydney issued a statement yesterday, and I thought this really captured Pope Francis's legacy in a way. He said that Francis will be remembered as a Pope of the peripheries who led the church to reach out to the margins. And some of the examples he cited there include the poor, the elderly, disabled, unborn, and prisoners.
Yeah, look, and Pope Francis's death will now see more than 140 cardinals head to the Vatican over the next few weeks to begin what's called the Papal Conclave, which is essentially the secretive election process to choose his successor. Now, it's also triggered an official 9-day mourning period, with mourners already gathering outside of the Vatican, and his burial is expected to take place over coming days. And look, if you want to learn more about what the process is now and how the new Pope will be selected, Sasha Barbagat actually did a deep dive into this recently, and we'll pop the app in the show notes for you.
Back home now, Aussies will hit the polls from today as early voting opens up across the nation. Some polls are showing Anthony Albanese edging further ahead of Peter Dutton, including Newspoll, as well as the Liberals having a lower primary vote than Scott Morrison ahead of the 2022 federal election. Over the long weekend, though, Peter Dutton made some big promises to combat crime, including pledging to trial a national child sex offender register if elected, which would give members of the public the ability to request information about a convicted offender. It would follow models already operating in Western Australia and overseas in the UK, which have already revealed thousands of pedophiles to members of the public.
Yeah, and meantime, over the weekend, Labor announced funding to help rough sleepers in Victoria and New South Wales. And we also saw some of the party's voting card preferences, which is causing a bit of a stir, Chris. One Trumpet of Patriots candidate says he's dropping out despite not being able to legally do this late in the mix, due to the party listing Labor and Liberals last and the Teals second in his electorate, while the major two are noticeably absent from their voting card suggestions in other electorates. Now, meanwhile, to no one's surprise, the Greens are telling voters to list Labor above Liberals on their website. Now, preferences can change between electorates, so I decided to have a look at how the major two are telling people to preference their votes just in my Brisbane electorate for a bit of an idea. Labor wants you to, unsurprisingly, put Labor first.
Of course.
But then the Greens second, legalise cannabis third, and then Liberal fourth, which I found a bit surprising. Meanwhile, the Liberals are saying to vote for them number one, number two, the Libertarian Party, number three, One Nation, and number four, Family First. So, as I mentioned, these will change electorate to electorate, but interesting to say the least.
Changing pace now, Australia's recorded its deadliest Easter weekend on record for drownings, with 7 across New South Wales and Victoria, following warnings about hazardous surf across much of the East Coast. Among the deaths were a number of fishermen and a 9-year-old boy named Kyson Greaves, who became stuck between rocks on the New South Wales mid-north coast. 5 of the drownings were people who were swept off rock shelves in New South Wales.
Yeah, meanwhile, in regional Victoria, there were 3 people who were washed into water near San Remo, with one woman making it back to shore and a second woman found unresponsive, but she was later pronounced dead. And then the third person was a man and one of the husbands of the woman who did pass, and he has still not been located, and rescuers have since called off the search for his body.
To the US now, where there are new calls for Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth to resign after fresh reports he shared last month's top-secret Yemen strike plans, not only with the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, but also with a Signal group chat including his wife, brother, and personal lawyer. The story, which first broke in the New York Times, has been slammed by the president and those most loyal to him as fake news and a bust-up by the Trump-hating media. But the existence of this second group chat has since been verified by reputable outlets like The Times, CNN, The Guardian, and Associated Press.
Now, it's understood that this group chat included flight schedules of US warplanes that conducted the strikes, and the White House maintains no sensitive or classified information featured in the chat. Now, now again, we had another deep dive looking into this topic when the first chat in that Signal group chat was revealed. Natasha Belling was joined by tech expert Trevor Long, who explained why it's a massive wake-up call for all governments, even here in Australia. So if you want to listen to that, again, we'll pop that in the show notes.
And 10-year-old Chris's dreams are coming true, getting to report on one of the wrestling greats, John Cena. The 47-year-old will headline a WWE event in Perth later this year as part of a 3-day retirement tour. The franchise confirming the 17-time WWE World Champion will be down under in October. Mark your calendars, briefers. I know that this is a strong interest point for a lot of you. And that's building on the success of an event last year in Perth, which saw over 50,000 fans flock to our West Coast, with out-of-state visitors bringing in more than $36 million to the state's economy.
Yeah, and the WA Tourism Minister is hoping that the wrestling star turned Hollywood actor can draw the same, if not more, people to the state this year, but they're refusing to say how much the government has spent on getting him to Perth. And the event will be broadcast across the world on Netflix in Australia as well. But look, who cares how much they spent, because John Cena is coming down under. And oh my gosh, I had no idea he was retiring. Is childhood Chris devastated?
Childhood Chris is devastated, but it depends on what era of childhood it was, because there was a solid year where I despised this man with all my heart.
I was going to add something similar to this.
And that's because my brother and I would love mimicking his wrestling moves, and it got to a point where our house got incredibly violent, and my mum was like, enough is enough. She ripped out our Foxtel card. She unplugged the box and cancelled our subscription. So we did have Fox for a solid 6 months of the year. And since my brother and I ramped up the violence, that was very short-lived. So if you asked me back then how I'm feeling about this, I'd be applauding. But now we're taking it all in. I actually can't believe that he's retiring and that he's 47 years old. That was something I found really interesting this morning.
Yeah, 47. I mean, no offense. I did actually think he was a bit older than that, but maybe we assume that if people are retiring. Look, I'm devastated in terms of the WWE side. I'm sure there's some massive fans who'll be, sad to see he's retiring. In terms of his acting career, I'm really sorry. I cannot say the same. I would be a hypocrite. I have been one to previously kind of say that John Cena was in a group where I would say they are known for some pretty poor films.
How very dare you? How very dare you?
Sorry. I feel like I'm going to be cancelled for this. But I will say, loved Ricky Stenicki recently. I thought that was one of his good ones. So I'll walk back that if people want to dispute it. But anyway, sad to see he's retiring anyway, and really stoked to see he's coming down under.
We love it. We love to hear a bit of honesty on a Tuesday morning, Tara. Hey, that brings our headlines to a close. Up next is my deep dive with Zoe Daniel. She is a Teal MP, and we talk about a lot of things, but one to keep you hanging on is just how exactly these independents came up with their colour. It's a very fascinating chat. Stick around. While most Australians still vote red or blue, a small but significant group of independents, dubbed the Teals, are carving out space in federal politics. One of them, who's vying for a seat again to represent her South East Melbourne electorate, is Zoe Daniel. The former journalist turned politician flipped a Liberal seat back in 2022 and is running again this year on a similar platform centred around climate change, bringing diverse voices into Canberra and holding the major parties to account. But how exactly do the Teals plan on doing that this time around? And is there anything stopping them from being true independents? Joining me now to answer those questions is MP Zoe Daniel. Zoe, thanks for joining me on The Briefing. To kick us off, what do you think are the top 3 issues facing Australians in the lead up to this election?
Oh, there's no doubt cost of living is the top issue. And in my electorate, that manifests in different ways. For some people, it's really direct cost of living pressure. And I live in a really expensive electorate. So cost of housing, whether you're renting or have a mortgage, is really high. And people are juggling that cost and often really high cost of childcare, for example, as well. For other people in my electorate, I think it's more economic anxiety. And to that, I think one of the other overarching issues that I hear about when I talk to my constituents is just concern that we're not making policy or changing policy in a way that will benefit future generations and secure the future of our young people. And so that goes to everything from tax reform to the housing crisis, to consistent climate and energy policy, to banning gambling advertising, student debt, and a whole range of other things. So there's sort of a cascading series of issues, but a lot of them do tie to prosperity, cost of living, and the economy at the end of the day.
And it sounds like you're hitting a lot of the buzzwords that would be interesting a lot of our listeners. I am curious to know, though, where the Teals are gaining the most traction, to your point, is in more affluent areas. How do your policies or the policies that you support appeal to everyday Australians?
Well, look, my policies, I think, appeal to people in my electorate who are people who want forward-thinking policy making and long-term policy making. I think there's really deep-seated frustration around 3 yearly short-term policy making in which the major parties just throw the ball between them and tinker around the edges on these structural issues, but never get anything really substantive done. There is an appetite for more visionary thinking, and I think there's an appetite for, I don't want to say more risk, but more ambition in the way that policy is made so that it sets us up for the future. And I think that level of frustration doesn't just sit in my electorate of Goldstein, but I think that sits in a lot of electorates across the country. And I think that's what's driving people to consider who else they could vote for other than a major party.
Well, speaking of the major parties, and even I want to dig into a little bit of the name, the Teals, and the colour choice behind it. That's a jumping point for a lot of people to accuse the Teals more broadly of being liberal light. Others say that the Teals are, carbon copy of the Greens. Where on the political spectrum do you sit, and what is your point of difference?
I think that I really do sit right in the centre of the political spectrum. I was a swinging voter throughout my life before I ran as an MP, and I never would have run for either of the major parties because I'm simply not ideological. My desire is for pragmatic, sensible, reasoned policy making that is for the benefit of most people. When it comes to the colour choice, it's really funny. Before the last election, I actually wanted to go with yellow because I really like yellow, and I'm one of the few people in the world who can wear yellow well.
It's also the colour of The Briefing, the podcast that you're on now. Just saying.
So this is totally on brand for you guys. The thing is, I was shot down by my team because of Clive Palmer, and also because most people don't like wearing yellow. And so it was like, well, what's the second choice? And I said, turquoise or teal. And so we chose the colour. And then this is dead true, I'm telling you. I then later found out that Zali Steggall had been branded a teal because it was a mix between green and blue, and then we all became the Teals, even though Kylie Tink had pink, for example, so it was not actually a teal. But we're apparently all now Teals, and it's sort of marketing that money can't buy in some ways. But I guess from some people's point of view, it's a liability. But look, I just try to make good decisions and respond to good ideas. And so if you would look at my voting record across the term, I have voted pretty much half the time for things that have been put forward by Labor, about half the time for things that have been put forward by the Greens, and about 40-something% of the time for things that have been put forward by the Coalition. And the rest of the time I've voted against those things. And I think actually that reflects what independents do, which is we're rigorous around looking at what is actually being put forward. We consult experts, we consult our communities, we try and find the holes in things, and if we can work with the government to fix them, we will. Otherwise, it's a no until the gaps in that get resolved. And obviously, if you vote for a member of the major parties, they will vote all the time with that party. But when you vote for an independent, you get someone who actually thinks through what's on the table that day.
Does it ever bother you that you are lumped as part of this group of the Teals?
Well, I think that people who support me know that I'm an independent, and they support me because they know that I'm an independent thinker. But also it so happens that the group of largely women who are referred to as Teals are fantastic people who have been really brave and entered the parliament in good faith to try to make a difference. They're people with different professional backgrounds who apply their brains and their capacity to bring their experiences as barristers or people who've worked in business or not-for-profit or sport, in my case media or medicine, to the decisions that we have to make for our country. And I'm really happy to be associated with that group of women because they are one tough bunch and they are very good people. Women understand that you have to have women in the room who will speak about things like violence against women and family violence, who will elevate that issue, who will speak about the cost of childcare and the fact that it might be preventing women from having another child because they have to choose whether to work or not. So it's kind of like anything. Once you diversify the voices in the room, whether they be people from different cultural backgrounds, people of different genders, people from, who have all sorts of different influences on their lives, then you come up with different decisions because the decision-making is better informed.
I want to zoom out a little bit. I mean, a key criticism of independence just in general in this country is this wide-held view across a lot of the voting public that the major parties hold all the power in Australia and independents just can't influence major policies. What would you say to people listening to this podcast right now who hold that thought and that belief?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that the biggest risk is continuing to elect the same people to fix the problems that they created. More of the same will lead to more of the same. And by getting sensible, reasoned, pragmatic, non-ideological voices into that conversation, you get better decision making. But, if I was to go to the sentiment that independents can't do anything, I would say that even without the balance of power in this term, we managed to wipe $3 billion off HEX debt by changing the way that HEX is calculated. We managed to legislate 43% carbon emission reduction as a floor, not a ceiling, because that was an amendment that I put into that legislation. We managed to get the single parent payment restored so people don't have to choose, women particularly, don't have to choose between violence and poverty. So that's just a smattering of the kinds of things that we've managed to achieve, and that's without the balance of power.
A point that always seems to be surrounding you and the Teals is that being backed by big donors compromises your independence. Do you agree with that point?
Who backs the major parties? What fossil fuel companies? What media companies? What mining companies? What gambling companies? I find it ever fascinating how much the media focus is on the fact that the independents are funded by partly, not entirely, partly by Climate 200, which is actually a crowdfunding movement. So at the last election, Climate 200 had 11,000 donors in my own fundraising, and we raised more than $1 million ourselves outside of Climate 200 funding. I had 1,999 donors, and most of those people donated less than $1,500. So the claim that the community independents are funded by big donors is a furphy, and people should be asking the question, who's funding your major parties? The person who ran against me at the last election, after the election, he declared 0 donations. And that's because all of his funding came through the Liberal Party, and that's not transparent. All of my donations are on my website for all to see.
I am curious to know, you were first elected in 2022, so you've been in Parliament now for 3 years. What's been your biggest lesson from your first term in Parliament?
I'm a former journalist, and I think journalists tend to think that they know what's going on. But the thing that I've realised is that what's in the public domain is about 20% of what's actually happening. A lot of the work happens behind the scenes and under the surface. A lot of the work is relationships, conversations, provoking discussion about important issues and building a case for change. And one good case study of that for me is eating disorders, something that had no attention on it whatsoever before I was elected. And we've since managed to get a lot of resources and focus onto that issue, to the extent that even with the government's new announcement on mental health funding, there is an eating disorder aspect to that. So again, there are several pathways to achieve an outcome. And I think what you have in the community independents currently is a group of people who will find a way to achieve that outcome that goes outside what the expected boundaries might be.
Well, speaking of outcomes, we know come May 3rd that we will have someone named as the Prime Minister of this country. Zoe Daniel, who do you think that will be?
Well, gosh, I could perhaps make a prediction, but I don't think I will at this point. And look, as you know, the polls are all over the place, and we will see. Lots of interesting things can happen in election campaigns that are unexpected, for good or bad. And my focus will be on winning my seat and spending time with people in my community to put the case for independent politics.
Excellent. Zoe Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
That was Zoe Daniel speaking with me there. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. It's a really easy way you can support us and all that we do here at The Briefing. So is leaving reviews and leaving nice comments on our socials. We love reading it. Or not nice comments, whatever. A comment's a comment, we'll take it. And hey, don't forget, we will have the afternoon edition of The Briefing in your feeds this afternoon from 4. That's hosted by Natasha Belling. And we will be back tomorrow morning with Tara Cassidy for your daily dose of headlines and an interesting deep dive. But until then, I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you next time.